We have an amazing panel assembled for today's conversation, and it really emanated from an informal conversation. My brother Charles, who's second from the left, and Ken Weinstein, who's all the way on the left, we were having dinner, and the two of them were talking, and I was just like, wow, this would make a great public conversation, because they're both developers, and so they indulged me and said, yeah, we're down. And then we said, we need some additional people. I talked to Brother Shomari, and he was like, you know, let's get Dominique, let's get Tayyib. And so we have this amazing panel of experts to really look at what gentrification can look like if it were equitable, if it was really about empowering communities as opposed to really being predatory. And so, and how our community can look at real estate as a wealth creation opportunity. So this is in line with the overall theme of the day around entrepreneurship and wealth creation. So I'm really excited to have this, this great group. And so I'm going to introduce the panel as per Brother Shomari's direction, and then I'm going to hand it off to him. So we've got Brother Shomari here, and then to his left is Tayyib Smith. And Tayyib is the co-founder principal of Meta Global, which is the parent company to Little Giant Creative, which is dedicated to cultural competency and the ability to engage multicultural audiences. He co-founded Pipeline Philly to serve as an inviting and dynamic co-working space filled with professionals from various backgrounds and industries, creating one of the most diverse workplaces in the city. Next to Tayyib is Dominique Casimir. She's the Deputy Commissioner of Real Estate in the city of Philadelphia. And Dominique is responsible for overseeing the lease negotiations and contracts for the city, both as a tenant and landlord, the disposition of vacant land, the purchase of property for city-sponsored projects, the acquisition of property obtained through the foreclosure process, renovations to new facilities, and space allocation decisions. So she's got a big job there. And next to Dominique is my brother Charles Lomax. He's been with the Lomax companies and its predecessors for over 25 years and is a partner with the firm with responsibility for its real estate activities. And he is the chairman of the Lomax Real Estate Partnership, and so he'll be talking about his experiences with our family business. And next to Charles is Ken Weinstein, and Ken is an active entrepreneur and real estate developer in the Philadelphia area. He serves as president of Philly Office Retail, which has renovated and restored more than 300 vacant and deteriorated commercial and residential units in the Philadelphia region during the past 30 years. And he also is the creator of Jumpstart Germantown, which I'm sure he will talk with us about as well. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to Brother Shomari, who is a Word host and beloved by the Word family. He has his show on Fridays from 1 to 4 p.m. So take it away, Brother Shomari.
Greetings and good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our conversation on equitable development, if that's possible. So we'll start with that question. The word gentrification has been used, so question to you all, and I'll start with Tayyib and move our way down. We have a short period of time with a very big conversation, so I want to jump right in. Is there a difference between urban equitable development and gentrification? And in a city like Philadelphia, which is marred by racism, is urban equitable development even possible? Let's start with you, Tayyib.
So is it possible? Absolutely. Do we have the infrastructure, the leadership, and the courage to do it in our present format? I think that's the question of the day and the question of our times. An analogy that kind of comes to mind is like how many resources go into certain beautification projects or for sports and entertainment. So like there's been 3 stadiums built in Philadelphia in like 20 years. The stadium costs anywhere between $3 billion and $5 billion. Municipal, state, federal funds, public-private money goes into building that. But if you were going to come up with an idea to put $3 to $5 billion in the Philadelphia infrastructure for, you know, equitable housing or workforce housing or affordable housing, people would say you're talking about being in a socialist country. So you have to have the courage, the imagination, and the vision, you know, and the leadership to do something that's equitable, and I think that's a historical challenge that we have, not just in Philadelphia, but in most predominantly black cities in the nation, where we don't control the flow of power or money.
Okay. And so, and I do want to clarify for each of you to answer the question around, is there a difference between gentrification and urban equitable development? Like, are they the same thing, or is there a difference? And the other thing is, I know I'm asking the questions and everybody wants to look this way, but please make sure you're talking into the mic. Look out at our listening audience. Make them feel like we're talking to them. So actually, I'm going to ask you to do a little work. Maybe move the mic kind of in front of you. Yeah, we're all family here, so thank you very much. Dominique.
Yes, thank you. So urban development and gentrification. So it's a very interesting question that you posed, and I think some of it has to do with how we use language and how we define things. And so is it possible? Absolutely. Equitable development is possible, but I think there has to be a mind shift in regards to how we insert ourselves in the process. And so with that being said, in order to insert ourselves in the process, that means we have to be homeowners, and we have to have an ownership stake, whether it's in the contracting phase, in the real estate, in different parts of the whole entire ecosystem in regards to what development actually is. And I think there's a difference between gentrification, and I'm going to go off the cliff here, and say resegregation. You know, I think if you're a homeowner, you obviously want to see gentrification. If there's 2 vacant properties on your block, obviously you would love to see them redevelop and a household filled with a community, you know, with a person that can sustain. The difference between gentrification and I would say resegregation is when you see massive development and people not having a home ownership stake and them being forced out of a community that they've been living in so long. You start to see the change of the retail scape. You start to see the change of the housing scape and people not being allowed to live there because the pricing index went so high. So I think the conversation has to shift a bit in regards to how do we get equity into certain communities? How do we become homeowners? And you know, how do we push that dialogue a little bit more?
Charles.
And if you can't hear me, I'm a low talker, so tell me to speak up. But in thinking about this panel and thinking about the idea of gentrification and equitable development, equitable development is definitely possible. As it relates to gentrification, I think about this a lot, and I think that gentrification is a symptom of a much, much bigger problem, which is the vast wealth gap between African Americans, African American communities, and other communities. And I think we have to start to develop tools to really, first of all, we have to diagnose the problem accurately, and then we have to develop a set of tools that, much to what Dominique said, is figure out how to create sufficient equity so that people in these communities can have the wealth in order to invest in land. Land ownership is probably one of the most fundamental ways to create wealth in this country. That was one of my father's absolute passions. It's one of our passions. And unless we own land and have the resources to do something with it, we're stuck in the mud, and we're never going to be able to deal with this issue. Gentrification is a market, is what markets do when they start to expand. How you create the capital necessary for folks in these communities to be able to participate in those changes that happen as a result of those market changes is what we need to figure out. I think that it's critical that we figure out, because right now, the way the wealth gap is structured and accelerating, it's not sustainable. It's very, very unstable. So.
Yeah, so urban development, in my mind, is very different than gentrification. And as Dominique already said, it's important to first define gentrification, because everybody has a different definition of it. For me, there's nothing positive about gentrification. Okay, it's the displacement of long-term residents, which is something none of us want. So then it becomes a matter of how do you do urban redevelopment while keeping gentrification down? Because anybody who says to you that you can improve a community without some gentrification is lying to you. Okay, so the question then becomes how to keep it down, how to keep it at bay. So there's a number of ways of doing this, of course, and we'll get into that. But one of the biggest ways is by changing who is doing redevelopment. You know, I've been to way too many, particularly commercial real estate development workshops and meetings, and it's 95% white male. We have to change that. We need to get more women and more people of color involved.
So I want to do a little context setting based on what I just heard. I heard Charles talk about the importance of land as the basis for wealth creation. And ironically, though, we're coming off of a period where African Americans saw an evisceration of their wealth through land loss, for lack of a better word. I call it land grab, colonization, whatever you want to. But when the housing bubble hit, because African Americans were directed into wrong structures of mortgage and things of that nature, I mean, we lost more wealth through loss of home ownership than ever in our history here as a people. So also in that context, I'm going to go back to Dominique. You're the only one up here probably in the conversations at a city policy level. When you all are deliberating about neighborhood development and transformation, how much of the impact on certain constituencies these decisions will have, how much does that factor into whether or not you move forward a project? When you're looking at a project and say, okay, this is no longer urban equitable development, this is gentrification. What are the stop points that says, now that we know it's gentrification, maybe we shouldn't do this because certain constituencies bear the burden?
I will say that this administration has really taken a step back to really do a comprehensive overview, I think for the first time, in really analyzing the systemic value of the problem. And so from a city council perspective, they've just recently published out a report that says narrowing the gap, talking about the equity gap between poverty, home ownership, workforce development, really understanding what policies need to be at stake in order to make decisions that fundamentally drive the marketplace. And then also, I will say the Planning and Development Department has, for the first time, put out a housing plan from like how to start, and if you go to the website, go to phila.gov, go to Planning and Development, there's a housing action plan where it goes and highlights from each stage, whether you're at the poverty level or you're working class and still struggling to afford something in the market, what are the different access points for you to ownership? Because one of the things that I think we've done all the time is talk about affordable housing. Affordable housing is great, but that does not create a pathway to ownership. Workforce housing actually does. And that's one of the things that we need to talk about is how do we create equity? You're talking about equity. The only way you can create equity is if you own something. And so one of the things that we're looking at even in our disposition policy, reassessing all of that, is how do we maintain a certain amount of land for workforce housing? Workforce housing means there's an ownership stake at a certain dollar level that people can afford to live there. And so we're definitely reevaluating how things have been done versus how things are today.
So I want to start down at the end with Ken and work our way back up through Tayyib. I think there's a consensus that Philly is probably not optimal in looking at how we do equitable development. But I heard all of you say that there was a possibility for it. So I wonder if you could share some models that you might be familiar with, some strategies that you may be familiar with that could help communities or individuals advocate for themselves around equitable development as opposed to gentrification.
Yeah, there's a number of strategies I think that we're using right now. Some of them we're doing a good job with, and some of them we aren't. As an example, I'm the chair of the PHDC, Philadelphia Housing Development Corporation, and City Council was smart enough to float a bond and give us $60 million last year to help us catch up with keeping low-income people in their homes. We're running programs like basic systems home repair and some other programs that as neighborhoods improve and as gentrification pressures come up, we need to keep those long-term residents in their homes, and basic systems home repair is one way to do that. So we have caught up with our wait list, which was awesome, and now as people call in and ask for these services, we can hook them up. Secondly, as Sarah alluded to in my intro, we started 4 years ago a program called Jumpstart Germantown, where we are training, mentoring, networking, and loaning money to local real estate developers so that they can develop locally and they can accumulate wealth locally. Again, this is a way to improve a community while keeping money in that community so it's anti-gentrification. So we have now spread this program to 8 communities, 8 neighborhoods around the city, and more needs to be done. Thirdly, we need to focus as a city, as developers, on scattered site rehab rather than what I call urban renewal, the knocking down of whole blocks and starting over. It's ruining the fabric of our community. It's pushing gentrification up faster. If we can do scattered site rehab, as Dominique said, taking a block that has 2 vacant houses and renovating those houses before it becomes 3 and 4 vacant houses, then again, we're doing it in a very organic way and not displacing people.
Okay,
So those are some ideas.
3 solid strategies. Charles, anything to add to those?
So the challenge in Philadelphia is, one, it costs a lot to build stuff. And the question is, how do you build something? You got to build something, then you got to build it at a price point that's accessible to folks, and then you got to identify the equity and capital necessary for them to actually acquire the property so they have an ownership stake in it. So those are some of the issues that really challenge, or some of the challenges with equitable development. I think that, you know, we're working on a project in Mantua right now, and one of the great things about Mantua is that it's on the fringe, and it's in an area that's in the process of transitioning. And to me, one of the best ways that you can do is identify this workforce housing product in an area that's going to see significant appreciation over the next 5 to 7, 10 years. And to the extent that you can create a product that is accessible to folks in an area that's transitioning, their investment will sort of double potentially in 5 to 10 years. And that's the way you create wealth for a family. Real estate and the transfer of real estate wealth is one of the most fundamental ways families create wealth for themselves and for the future generations. You know, I don't know whether it was Ken or Dominique who mentioned or even Shomari, what happened in 2008, the loss of all that land. Right now, there are people coming into these communities and just grabbing stuff. And to the extent, and the city is taking an active role in trying to figure out how to create more workforce housing. It's just, doing the math equation, getting the math to work is really, really challenging. But I think that, Philadelphia has a tremendous opportunity because Philadelphia is not DC, it's not Boston, it's not New York. It hasn't happened yet. It's happening now, but it hasn't happened yet. And so to the extent that the Dominiques, the Greg Hellers, the private developers like Ken and myself collaborate and figure this out, there's an opportunity that we can potentially be a model for other cities where these types of things are happening. But I think one of the most critical things is you need to start in areas that are transitioning already, because that's where the value is going to appreciate the most, and people who own something there can actually benefit the most from it.
And I'm going to ask a follow-up that I want you all to think about based on the points you just raised, Charles, is what are the pressure points right now that people in the audience, people listening to you, where do they go to exert leverage on this process? Because I think that in many ways, You know, people are protesting about gentrification after the fact in certain hot spots around the neighborhood, but I don't think our political structure, I don't think our developers, I don't think people who say that they're for equitable development have really been forthcoming and transparent about letting constituents know how to have leverage on this system and this process. So I'm gonna come back to you all on that. I just want to put that out there.
Is that for me?
It's not for you.
Okay.
It's going to be for you
Okay.
soon.
That's-
So I'll just say that it's never been in the black community's best interest to be disengaged from planning, power, or following the movement of public policy. And I think intergenerationally, we have come to a space of disconnect where people talk about gentrification, but if you go to a city planning meeting or something for the Preservation Society, or if you know about the different community housing association meetings, a lot of times, particularly our young people are not there. And if you're not following the ball, you're not in the game. And I think a lot of us have fallen asleep at the wheel, where we still complain about things in our community, but we're not engaged in the planning process of what happens. And I'll just say one more thing. Usually, whether it's an administration, public policy, government, for-profit, there's like a 3 to 5 year planning process for something, all right? And when they come to the black community, they come with an engagement plan to roll out and ask you, do you want light green or do you want dark green? But they've already figured out the financing. They've already hired all of the consultants. The construction crew has been selected. The investments have been selected. But all you're going to get to decide is, like, do you want a blue park or do you want a green park? And we have to be involved in every step along the way in the process.
And can I just add to that? I
Sure.
apologize. But to your point, the advocacy has to start with ourselves. If we're waiting for government, if we're waiting for everybody else to save, like, it will not happen. You have to be proactive in understanding, what does my credit structure have to be in order for me to get into a position where I can own something? What resources in regards to community agencies from a CDC standpoint, from a loan perspective, can I obtain? You know, and to your point, in these meetings, when we have open public forums, we do not see enough community representatives there until a decision has been made, and then the community says, why haven't I been involved or engaged? And that is tough, because, you know, when you're actually working and grinding and doing all these things, the amount of time and flexibility it takes to advocate for yourself, you may not have that, but the advocacy comes in the day-to-day, figuring out the resources that you can do and the steps that you could do in order to be more engaged in the process.
So if we start with that as a given, I'm gonna
Yeah,
try to be an objective moderator. It's gonna be very hard
Okay,
based on what you just
alright.
said. I'm letting you know, but I'm gonna work it out here. But if we use what you said as a given, that people need to self-advocate, how do you do that effectively when there's clearly a macro system that has targeted your neighborhood, targeted your conditions? I mean, you have tax liens, sheriff sales, adjustable rate mortgages, housing bubble algorithms. So you have politicians that have made, you know, agreements. So I think in some ways we are minimizing, number one, the problem by making it an individual issue about credit and protecting your finances, when really the system is aligned against your community and neighborhood, at least from the perspective of the people who are being impacted. And so the question becomes, how do you give voice at a point where it matters, where it will make a difference, not after the fact, as you all are saying? Like, you know, I don't think people know the power of a registered community organization or a civic association. Why aren't people teaching us on the front end how we could not just combat, but prevent gentrification in the spaces and places where we live? That's the question I want people to answer.
So if I could jump in, I would say do more than just advocating. Do it yourself. I go on Facebook all the time and I see people complaining about blight in their neighborhoods, lack of affordable housing in their neighborhoods, all real complaints. Well, let's train ourselves. Real estate development's not for everybody, but I'm going to be honest with you. If you're willing to take some risk, if you can put together $15,000, either your own money, neighbors, friends, colleagues, whoever, you can become your own real estate developer. You can buy that blighted property in your neighborhood because you know who the owner is. Outside developers don't know who that is. You know, go through the Jumpstart program, go through another program, but get yourself educated, borrow the money from Jumpstart, borrow the money from a bank, whoever, but do it yourself. And to me, that's the best way to make change and to make change directly.
Anybody else want to add?
So I often think, and I particularly say about Black millennials, that like as a community, we don't know how broke we are. So, you know, the average, the median white family versus the median Black family has about 12 to 13 times more wealth, right? And then you have to deal with intrinsic bias within banking. So like there was recently a mortgage company, and I heard this on WRD, and I won't call them out, but out of 1,000 mortgage loans, only 28 went to African-American families. And when I talked to someone I know in mortgage and real estate about that, he put me in front of a bunch of bankers in the region. And when I talk to people about intergenerational public policy, everything from, you know, being denied access to the GI Bill, or how the Fair Housing Act wasn't fair towards us, or how highways were put through our, you know, through our communities, and how we weren't even allowed to participate in the contracts for the building of those highways. Bankers tend to talk to me about fiscal responsibility and people getting their credit ratings up. So there is a confluence of issues, to your point, that have been at war with the Black community to be able to age, thrive, be educated in place. But I'll go back to my original point, you know, to kind of push back on what you said about why people aren't empowering us or teaching us. There's no point in the African experience within the Americas have people reached out to teach you something that is in your best interest, right? So we have to, like basically we have to hack the system by any means necessary, you know, by hook or by crook, as we used to say. And if you are not going to be engaged, if you're not going to advocate both at the board level or at the street level, if you're not going to harass your public officials, if you're not engaged, the war is going to act like a confluence, like a cancer on our community, and we are already being displaced, not just in Philadelphia, but nationally in an alarming rate. Poverty is going up in the suburbs because Black people in particular are being displaced out of urban cores. So as much as we could say, like I know people are tired. I know this has been an intergenerational fight, but it's like it's never been more important to be more engaged than we've ever been in the past.
Anybody else want to answer?
Let me just put my 2 cents in, is that much to Tayyib's point, and this is sort of where I started, is that this is not a mistake. This is not a mistake. The situation we're in is intentional. This situation started in the 1800s. Correct. All right? And so gentrification is a symptom of the wealth gap issue that we have and our inability to own, you know, to create wealth for our families. And, you know, yes, you can talk to your council person, you can talk to the Dominiques of the world, you can talk to folks, and I think that they're willing to help, but I think more importantly is we have to sort of think about how we fix this thing ourselves.
Right.
I mean, as Tayyib said, there's never been a situation where they said, here, let me help you out and figure out how to do this. This situation that we find ourselves in is intentional and 400 years in the making. And it's going to take a minute to fix. It's going to take a minute, but it's really, really critical that we understand how we got here, why we're here, because that'll give us the tools to figure out how to fix it.
Mm-hmm.
There's
Dominique.
a great book called The Color of Law,
Right.
and it explains the whole diaspora of the situation from a housing displacement of the African American experience. And to Charles' point, the system has been designed and it is working. So in order to disrupt any type of system, it can't come within the system. It has to come from the individuals to create a new system to counter what is currently in place. And that's what everybody is saying, to the point of you have to start. There is no recipe to say, hey, go to these 3 organizations and something will change. The change has to come from a grassroots level and inspired from a grassroots level. But the more important question is access to capital in a way that's not dependent upon government, but that is dependent upon ourselves. And one of the things that I have not seen traditionally amongst the African American community is pulling our resources or our dollars together like other communities have done. And that is something that we have to think about as to, I may have 5,000, you may have 5,000, you may have 5,000. How can we come together to build something greater than just individually? And I think that's where the grassroots foundation comes into play in regards to changing a certain dynamic.
So I have one more question, then I'm going to open it up for questions from the audience. It's a given that Philadelphia as a city is moving towards becoming a world-class, global, smart, future city. That's a given. You all said that there's a difference between equitable development and gentrification. So I'm going to create an office called the Commissioner of Urban Philadelphia Equitable Development. Like, let's assume equitable development is our goal. So I want you all to speak from different perspectives about strategies and actions that people could take from where they sit to make sure that the development that is going to happen, because it's going to happen, is as equitable as possible. So Commissioner Tayyib, Commissioner of Equitable Development, from a resident's perspective, what are some of the strategies and plays and actions that you would advocate for people taking to make sure that whatever development is happening in Philadelphia as we move forward, it is as equitable as it could be?
Okay, so Philadelphia is approximately 45% black, 67% people of color, and we only make up about 2.5% of the businesses, all right? And by the mandate of the city through council, we're supposed to get somewhere between 29 and 30, let's say 2% of the contracts. That math does not work out. So like, Philadelphia is in a construction boom, both residential and commercial. And as a community, nothing should move if it's not beneficial to us or we're not participating. I would also say that we need some sort of new deal. So just as international finance, and particularly American dollars, were able to rebuild Europe after World War II, the black community has had an intergenerational war on our wealth and our home ownership. So we need public policy and dollars, both for-profit, philanthropic, and governmental, that are going to make us whole. So whether that's for affordable housing, whether that's for first-time owner, whether that's for our elders to be able to age in place, whether that's for, kids in the inner city to be able to have matched dollars so that they get the same amount of dollars the kids in the suburban ring get, because some kids in the western suburbs get twice as many annual dollars versus someone in the urban core. We need transformative public policy that is going to make our community whole, because we have a myth of meritocracy that everything is fair and that we're playing from an equal ground.
Philadelphia Commissioner of Equitable Urban Development, Charles Lomax, from a developer's perspective, what are some of the strategies and plays that we could make to be as equitable as possible in the development?
So what I would do is I would implement a holistic development model that focuses on mixed income housing, creating a extremely high quality, not okay, but a high quality cradle to education pipeline, and then community amenities and support services, and then make sure there's sufficient capital to support that. And to the extent that you can implement something like that, would be able to identify outside capital to support the program. To the extent that you have the right people, the right ideas, you can raise capital to do it. So you get seed money from the government, potentially. The less money you get from the government, the better. Let me just say that. But you get seed money from the government, and then build on that and come up with a mixed-use development plan. But basically holistic, and critical to that is a high-quality educational resource in whatever community you're building. I mean, to the extent, I mean, the challenge we have in Philadelphia is, you know, you have a high poverty rate, but you have an abysmal education system. It's not all bad, but to the extent that you can improve it, and I think as an equitable developer or commissioner of development, I would say I'd want to take some of my resources and make sure that wherever I'm developing, those educational assets are fortified and improved significantly.
So now let's hear from Philadelphia Commissioner of Equitable Urban Development from the elected official's perspective, Commissioner Ken Weinstein.
I don't know how I ended up with the elected officials, but I'll take it. So if I get to decide and everyone has to do what I say.
You're the Commissioner of
I've
Urban
been elected.
Equitable Development.
I've been elected. So what I would do, several things. One is if we want to truly get rid of the blight in our neighborhoods and we want to produce more affordable housing, the city needs to relinquish control of all the city-owned vacant lots, vacant buildings, and we need to open up those floodgates. Why? I mean, the obvious reason is because then it produces properties for us to develop. We could add them back to the tax rolls, produce more tax funding for our schools and other places. But more importantly, something that we don't often think about is if we could significantly increase the supply of properties to be developed, higher supply is going to lower the prices ultimately, and it's a way to produce more affordable housing by opening up the floodgates. Secondly, if we want to directly address the long-term residents in our neighborhoods so that they are not as negatively impacted by development, it's something that we all want, we need to keep increasing the homestead exemption. So it's now up to $50,000 threshold that people don't have to pay for the first $50,000 in property value when they do their real estate taxes each year. I would like to see that number keep going higher and higher. I understand it puts a higher tax burden on the rest of us, but we should be willing to pay for that in order to protect the long-term residents in the neighborhood. And last but not least, if we want to incentivize developers to do more affordable housing, you know, like Charles and I are trying to do in the neighborhoods, and many other people too, we need to make it easier for us to do that. I mean, some developers do it out of the good of their heart, and that's great, and we believe that you can do well by doing good. But for the rest of us, the city needs to relax code restrictions, some zoning restrictions, which is already happening, and making permitting easier. What if you let developers who want to do affordable housing get to the front of the line when we are applying for permits? Why not do that? Why not make it easier and help developers do the right thing?
Okay.
I hope I win re-election.
And last but not least, Philadelphia Commissioner of Equitable Urban Development. You might be the closest actually to this title, for real. You know, so as a person who is in the system, as a policy stakeholder, different than a politician, you actually do the work of the policy, making these things happen. What could be done to assure that as this city moves forward, it does development more equitably as opposed to gentrification?
So if I had this title in real life, I would take a little bit of everybody. So from Tayyib, what I would do is from a residential standpoint, I would make sure that everybody actually, from a business standpoint, the developers that are coming to the table, the architects, the designers, actually look like the community, or are from the community or have a stay at the community mandated up front. Period, point blank. There is no zoning, there is no permit unless you have that buy-in from an upfront perspective. Also, from an education standpoint, if you're doing massive development on a certain scale, I would mandate that you dip a little bit more into the educational fund for the specific community. So that specific community gets investment, whether it's in books, education, but not just education, also health. A lot of times we neglect, we talk about food deserts, but we don't talk about health deserts. A lot of people don't have access to proper healing resources, doctors, care, different things like that. So I would put a policy in play that if you're going to do a massive development scale, that has to be an investment into the educational system and also into a health perspective. In regards to the third, from a land perspective, I'd also mandate, I know we talk about affordable housing a lot, but I'm more so about equity. How do we own at the end of the day? And so there would have to be more lease to ownership programs. You can't lease to me for 30 years. You can't lease to me for 15 years. You need to have a viable plan where if I'm leasing from you for X amount of years, a certain percent of that goes into escrow for a purchase so that I can actually have an equity stake and I'm not displaced in the future. And then last but not least, I have to put it in there for seniors. One of the things that we do not have enough stock of is senior housing that you can age into. There's a lot of levels, and I've had to deal with this personally with my mother and my aunt. Stairs are hard. People are not thinking about, like, how do I age? And they do not want to leave their homes or their communities. So I think a certain percentage would be allotted for senior development, not affordable housing, again, where they can actually own.
So what I'm going to do is ask you all to give our panelists a hand. I'm going to take no more than 3 questions, and then I'm going to come back to you all and give you 60 seconds to give us your final words. Let's go to questions. I saw your hand first, so let's is there a microphone we can get to her?
Thank you very much, Word. I love you guys so much. It's ridiculous. The brilliance, that's what I love.
I appreciate that.
I did not hear, I heard developers, development, I have no problem with that, but I did not hear community education. I did not hear bringing youth into this business aspects of operation from the government, city. I think we're at city level, right?
Right. So what would your question be to
My
bring that
question
into
would
the
be,
conversation?
why is no one talking about educating? You want to come into the community, why aren't you educating or talking about setting up a program for youth, people of, mid to adult age? Why
I
not
would
that?
like Charles and Dominique to answer that question.
So the question was what? Why aren't they setting up programs?
Right.
So I mean, I can answer that question, but he has a program that does that.
He said Jumpstart Germantown.
Jumpstart is a real program that's effective that started in Germantown and is spreading all over the place. So you want to explain it again so she understands?
Yeah.
I mean, that was like tailor-made for
But
her.
I'm going to expand my answer also. Thank you for your question. But Jumpstart is a program where we are trying to educate people how to do development, but also how development happens. Because a lot of people are going through our program, and we have 625 graduates over the last 4 years just in the Germantown area, that even if people don't come out of our program being a developer themselves, because it's not for everybody, at the very least, they will come out of the program understanding the process, understanding how it all happens. But to add to that, and I didn't say this before, a very important part of development for those of us who care about the community and don't just go in, develop, and then leave, is working with the community, is meeting with the community before you ask them for support on a zoning variance, meeting with the community so that they understand what you're doing, even if you're doing a project by right. That's the proper way to do development. And those of us who have the understanding of the development process really need to get out in front of it and help the community understand and educate the community how things work so that they're not in the dark.
And Ken, real quick, can you give people information about how to research the Jumpstart program if they want to?
Yes, you
Get more
can go to
information.
either jumpstartgermantown.com, and you could sign up for our training program, our developers network, or apply for a loan. Or you can go to gojumpstart.org, and all of our curriculum, education materials, all open source. They're all on the website. You can read through it, and then you don't have to go through our training program.
But also, real quick, I do want Dominique to weigh in. Are there city community education programs or things out there that people can access?
So I just wanted to speak specifically about youth because you mentioned youth. So there is the Philadelphia Youth Network, where there have been a number of internships for youth that are interested in this type of area or arena to have internships and mentorships with various organizations, whether it's CDCs, developers, or just city agencies in general. So I do want to put that out there, that there are establishments. But I think my friend Tony Ewing is in the room. They, what was the name of the organization that you partnered with? They did a partnership with Drexel University, which specifically, NAIOP, and Drexel University, that specifically targeted minorities. I hate using that word, I'm sorry. But
Can you tell us what NAIOP is, by the way?
it's the National Association of
It's a real estate trade organization of owners and operators.
All
And we
right.
partnered with Drexel for a youth education program, a full 1-week immersion program, and we hope to be exclusively for Philadelphia city-based children. Thank
So
you.
does that answer your question? Give you something to work with and start with it. I don't know who has the mic next. I saw this gentleman's hand. These were the first two hands I saw. Then you can pick after that.
Good afternoon. I'm Bill Donahue. I'm Director of New Heritage Community Development Corporation, and we're located, our wheelhouse is Broaden, Indiana, the North Philadelphia train station, which is now in play.
Right.
I do have a question concerning that process where the fix was in from the beginning, and I'll speak on that in a minute. But Ken,
Well, we're not going to have. I need you to jump right to your question. though.
okay. So what I want to know is how it is that I know about something a year before, a full year before. The Inquirer article broke this story in their Sunday paper. And the developers had been on site for 3 years at that point, and someone, my friend downtown, tipped this to me. And when I started looking into it, I started warning people in the neighborhood that this was coming. All during that time, our elected district representative's office, there wasn't a peep out of them. When it hit the newspaper, the comment was, when the reporter asked, "What about this?" "Oh, I didn't know about it until it was in the newspaper." So what I want to know is, can we put something in effect where it's a rule that the representatives, the elected representatives of these districts, must disclose from the beginning that these projects are in play so that the community, who they don't want organized, can make sure they're organized so they don't get steamrolled, which is about to happen up there.
Okay.
So this is tough. I will say, it's fine. I will say that was prior to me joining. So,
Okay.
so I'm so happy.
Good one.
But to the
but
bigger
his question
question,
was-
to the bigger question, I will say that this has been something that has been under review under the Kenny administration in regards to the Disposition Act. And right now, everything is on hold until we have a clear disposition policy. I cannot speak for what happened in the past, but I can speak for what is going to happen or what is being proposed on the table for the future. And
All right. So that's going to
that's
be a personal
personal
conversation that
question.
you'll need to add. But what I'm hearing you saying, his question was, is there a way to have due diligence around notification before? And you're saying that that's
you will
being
see
considered.
that you will see this becoming an issue of topic on the floor for council, I would say, in the beginning of the fall, where these conversations will be happening.
Okay.
So be engaged.
All right.
Be engaged.
Can I just make a general comment on that?
Real quick,
Not
as she's finding our
specific-
next question.
Not specific to this situation, but transparency, which hasn't been mentioned yet today, is a big thing. And I know that the city, that this mayor is trying to make things as transparent as possible and usually does that, but not in every case. It's an ongoing struggle in our city because until things are truly transparent, we cannot level the playing field and get all developers at the same level and all people
But
in
I,
the city
I
at the
think
same
the
level.
challenge, and I'm hearing it being addressed, is that transparency shouldn't be left to individual discretion. There needs to be a system
Correct.
that makes sure and assures that the process is as transparent as possible. And I think that we need to advocate and make sure that that happens. So question over, I don't know who has the mic.
I think that we hear a lot about community, but in reality, community can translate to 2 ministers around the corner and 2 politicians. And by the time the real community hears about it, the deal is done.
Okay. So, okay, I'm good with that. I need you to tell me who's next, and we gotta make sure we have asking questions.
Yes, hello. I just moved here from Manhattan, and you said that you follow gentrification of other major markets, and I was wondering, with respect to Harlem, how you feel that process has been handled. There has been displacement of minority residents. There are many
So I'm
Many
going to need to cut you off because we're about to close out. What I want to do is kind of reframe her question in such that you have closing words. Harlem is a famous example of, particularly from a black perspective, gentrification impacting people, black people. What has Philadelphia, or can Philadelphia learn from Harlem not to do as we're moving forward?
That's what I want to know, because...
Yes, that's why I do what I do, so thank you.
Okay.
Let's start down there with Ken and move it down to Tayyib.
I don't know exactly what's happening in other communities, but what I do know from around the country, but what I do know is that it is gentrification. It's too late for some neighborhoods in Philadelphia, particularly the hot neighborhoods that are Center City and touching Center City. But middle neighborhoods in Philadelphia are still more than 50% of our city. And those are areas that need our reinvestment, that have been hurt by redlining and disinvestment for many years. And those are the areas where we need to be concentrating and focusing. So I would like to see lots of attention going to the middle neighborhoods to produce what we call NOAH, naturally occurring affordable housing. Where we don't need city funding, where we just need developers and hopefully local developers to buy, rehab, and then either rent out or sell properties so that we can improve those communities.
And that's Ken Weinstein. Let's give him a hand for participating. Charles Lomax.
So I'm not sure what middle neighborhoods are, but if you go to a hot neighborhood, go to the fringe of that hot neighborhood, and that's where you want to, if I was buying land, that's where I would go. Hot neighborhoods are too expensive right now. So you go to the fringe of those neighborhoods. And Philadelphia's a city of neighborhoods. You know where those neighborhoods are that are just going bananas. Go to the fringe of those neighborhoods and invest there. And that's where you're going to find the best value for your investment dollar. That's,
all right.
That's my 2 cents.
And we can look out for some future development and work from you in the Mantua area of the city?
Yes. And hopefully it will resonate with equitable development.
Yes.
So.
We will hold you to that expectation.
Tell Sarah on me.
No money.
Going back to the question of how do we prevent a Harlem from happening again, Harlem was one of the few cities where we actually owned our property. And so what I'm going to say is we need to have the uncomfortable conversations in our families about how property is transferred. We're not doing estate planning. And so what's happening is that generation is dying off, proper documentation is not left behind, and people are fighting over the property. It either goes to the state or it gets offloaded to a developer. And that has been the consistent plan. Also, people are knocking on people's doors, offering what they seem to think is a lot of money, not understanding the true value of what they truly have. And I think these are the dialogues that we need to be having in regards to estate planning, because that's not something that we've traditionally had a dialogue about. We need to talk about, before you die, how is this asset going to be divided amongst family and friend, like family, and whose responsibility is it going to be to have an ownership stake? So in regards to that, I would say that. In regards to the whole equitable development, this is something where I would say that the administration is open to. This is the first time that there's somebody like me sitting at the table where there's a female and person of color. I am very vocal about our standpoint. I am very open to saying what's wrong, and I'm just so happy to be sitting at the table, but I don't want to be the only person sitting at the table. And I think all the time we grow up, we say, oh, you want to be a doctor, you want to be a lawyer. There's other professions that we can have a very heavy stake in that we're not advertising to our youth. About real estate. That's the biggest way that you can change wealth in your family tree. And we're not having these conversations. So I would say each one teach one. Tell people you do what you love, but do it in a way where it can be an investment and you can have an ownership stake.
And last word on the matter, Tayyib Smith.
So for me, if there was to be a Harlem in Philadelphia, it would be 52nd Street, because I used to live in West Philly as a kid. And you can't go to a sit-down restaurant that is desirable, aspirational on 52nd Street, and that is a crime to me, right? So the fact that we have anchor institutions like University of Pennsylvania that have a $14 billion endowment, and you can't tell a child or a parent in West Philadelphia how to get into that school, or there's no opportunity trickling down from that school, we have to do a much better job of demanding from our largest employer, which is UPenn, and institutions like Temple in North Philadelphia, or institutions like Thomas Jefferson that control how healthcare and behavioral health dollars flow to our communities. There has to be more courage and imagination in the business community versus the political spectrum to actually make our communities whole.
And I want to thank you all. I know we tried to tackle a very big conversation. This is not the first or the last time that we will address urban development or gentrification through WURD Radio. I apologize. There were a lot of people with questions, hands up. Keep in touch with our work, but also become engaged. Find out who the RCOs, the civic associations are in your neighborhood. Join them, flood them, create your own, because as is clear, if we don't become stronger, more courageous and powerful advocates over ourselves and our communities and what goes on in those spaces, none of this will matter. We will watch this city change from majority city of color, which it is right now, to it not being so. So the power is in our hands. We have to choose to use it. And I thank you. Let's give our panelists a hand one more time.